Hello and welcome to Let's Talk with Matt and Johnny. In season 2, we're inviting guests onto our show to have even more powerful conversations about a variety of topics, and this week is no different. We're joined by Helen Victoria to talk about her social enterprise called Living Liberty, which has been set up to help individuals that are dealing with physical and emotional abuse. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment, and we hope you enjoy. Hi guys, welcome to Helen. Thank you very much for joining us. So Helen, obviously we've known each other for a long time, but just for the listeners and for the guys, just kind of give us a bit of a backstory as to where you're at and talking about Living Liberty as well.
So I started Living Liberty in 2012. So I started a blog, which at the time was quite new, and now everybody has one. But at the beginning, I just started a simple blog that I just did mainly for myself. At the time, I just started a career as a professional dancer, and I was living in Morocco. But I'd also just left about a year before a really abusive relationship, and so I was sort of kind of adjusting to a whole new chapter while sort of closing the last one I'd been in. And I was quite stuck at the time, and my mental health was pretty poor at the time. So I started writing, and then no one really read the blog apart from me and my mum for quite a long time. And then eventually, over the years, it just started to like organically sort of grow an audience, and people started to connect with it. And I was just sharing articles about the possibilities of sort of life beyond abuse and about healing and sort of recovery journey, and it's just grown. And then last year I retired from stage, and then I launched Living Liberty as a full-time social enterprise. So I managed to get miraculously some funding, and now it's my full-time work. So I've sort of developed it into education and sort of teaching about how to build healthier relationships and just like the positive sides of building healthier relationships to prevent abuse. So yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, that's
good.
Kind of
Very good.
like a snapshot of like 8 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoa,
Condensed that.
what a journey so far, eh?
Yeah. It is. It's a weird one now. Even now, like I've explained and I've almost used that similar phrasing so many times, and to me, it's still really exciting. And I really is this new stage of it is it's still fairly new. I've only really sort of had this developed version of it for the past year, and it's just been really exciting, and it's connected me with some really positive opportunities and people, like even like a podcast like this, like it's just gives me like so many opportunities to connect with like-minded people.
Amazing.
Boom.
Unbelievable. I've got to say, I was looking at your Instagram last night, and I love how normal you are. You're real, relatable. Your posts are like, were you in Spain? Like,
Portugal.
on the beach. You were just like, this is me, this is memories. I love that.
Yeah, I think it's just that was the thing that I think has worked, and that's the thing I've held on to throughout as I've been sort of developing the blog is although I've sort of got a little bit better with tech, and I've developed the company and I'm doing all the sort of businessy side of it now and sort of developing it, I've made sure that it's still me speaking, and I try not to sort of over edit any of my posts, or like even in terms of my writing, I resist temptation to dive in and make everything sort of perfect, as it were.
Was it also a video you did? I guess it's like a coping mechanism. Was it the red circle that I watched?
Oh yeah, that anxiety circle.
Oh, it's like things like that, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Because that's the thing is, I think I'm not. I did do some training as a life coach, and I thought I wanted to go that way for a little while, but I realised I was more passionate about prevention stuff. And then I think I don't know, like everybody deals with like a different spectrum of mental health all of the time. So it's like, I think for a while I was aiming all my stuff at what I thought was a certain type of person that had been through a certain type of relationship. And then I realised that like all of us have been through in some way an unhealthy relationship, like everybody, whether it's with like a sibling or a friend or like romantically or whatever. And that brings about a lot of anxiety. It can really affect our mental health, and everybody experiences that. Like there's no one that's exempt from it. So it's sort of just finding, like, I find that I just have to keep building like my toolkit, as I call it, like sort of to be able to cope and to overcome. So yeah, that's just like one of the things I developed, sort of like an idea to develop sort of.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's take it right back to the very beginning then. So the abusive relationship, if you don't mind me asking, what sort of, how did it all, what happened, or if you
So
don't mind.
I was 15 when the relationship started, and obviously when you're 15 you think you're really like everything. Turns out you don't. So I met this person when I was 15, and at the time I was like probably every other teenager on the planet, that I was pretty insecure and I wasn't really sure of who I was. And I met this person who was a bit older than me. He's very charming. Yeah. It's like the typical stereotypical story, but we had an amazing relationship, like sort of perfection, as it seemed like perfection. It moved very quickly. So within a month, saying he loved me, and we moved in together when I was in my late teens. Okay. And then we bought a house together when I was, I think, just turning 20. So by then we'd been together like 4 or 5 years. And so, I trusted this person, and like we were really, really close, obviously. And then once we bought the house together, everything changed. So overnight he was starting to say, right, we've got to grow up now. Things are going to change around here. We need to start, acting like adults. And he had this whole thing about, about how life should be now, whereas before we've been a lot more relaxed and sort of felt like our age. But now he had this thing about, the impression that we give to other people. And that's kind of where it started. And then it just kept developing. And of course, like with any relationship, no matter how it ends up, when things start to go wrong, it's really easy to just think, do you know what, maybe he's just freaking out because we bought a house, maybe it's just a phase, maybe he's stressed, maybe it's this. And I just kept making excuses for his behaviour. And then it just developed. So I lived there for 3.5 years, but it became extremely controlling, physically violent, sexually violent, like a really bad situation to be in. But outside of our house, like out of our home, we seemed like sort of the perfect couple. We had this lovely house, like really young. Yeah. We had this, really nice BMW on the drive, like all the things that seemed like the perfect image of sort of a relationship. But yeah, it was behind closed doors. It was really different. So yeah, sort of, it's a strange one, because I think for a long time, it's really typical for people in abusive relationships to think they're the only one in it. And I think because of the age I was, I felt that even more, because most domestic violence sort of support stuff is aimed at, people that need refuges, that have children, sort of more middle-aged. And so I felt like as a 21-year-old, none of my friends were going through what I was going through. So I didn't really know where to begin to sort of get out of it. So yeah.
In terms of like, how did you get out of that?
Yeah. So the thing is with generally abusive relationships, they go in a cycle. So you'll generally have a peak moment where it's going really well and you forget that it's ever been negative, and you kind of hold on to that hope. Then it starts to build up, there starts to be some more signs, it comes to a crisis. We just went round and round like this for years. And then it came to a certain point one night where I had this idea. I was constantly, I think, trying to fix the relationship, and kept trying to find new ways to make it better, because I think I was holding on to the first 3-4 years rather than accepting the reality of the present. I was still thinking, we can get back to how we were and it'll be fine. So I'd had this idea to go for a drive, and I'd said, let's just leave the house, because it was always inside the house where the abuse happened. And by this point, like, I was dealing with a hell of a lot of depression, anxiety. I was totally lost my self-esteem. But I still was holding on to hope that it could be okay. So we went for this drive, and I ended up having a really strong panic attack. So I was hyperventilating, which is really typical of how I was sort of my mental health at the time. And then he just basically lost his temper. We were going around, he was driving me to the hospital. He used to drive me to the hospital quite a lot. It was like a bit of a abusive tactic. He would just drop me off at sort of Royal Berks Hospital and just be like, well, they'll deal with you. And then he'd pick me up a few hours later, like, supportive friend, I've just come to collect my friend, is she okay? So it was this cycle again. Nice guy. And then I fell out of the car door. So I was panicking, and we was going down a dual carriageway, and he just opened the door, I fell out, and he carried on driving, and then he just threw my bag out the window after, and then just drove off. And actually, I think so. Landing on that road was a pretty big wake-up call. Thankfully, somebody found me, so they pulled me out of the road. But he actually came back and sort of feigned that he'd heard I had an accident. Is Helen okay? Because I think he thought he'd get in trouble.
Yeah,
I
basically.
very submissively got in the car again, went home with him. But luckily, the passerby called the police, and because they didn't believe him, and they gave the number plate, and the police came. But by then, I'd already left the house, because my actual turning point was not the car, not that particular event, because we'd had violence in our relationship before. It was the fact that when we got home, he just went in the house, put the telly on, put the football on, and started reading the newspaper. And I just remember like standing in the doorway, and I was all like cut up and bloody and everything. And I just remember thinking, actually, like, you just have a wake up moment. And I think actually sometimes relationships don't have that big, it takes a while to gradually adjust. But I think it was like the lights went on, and then that was it. I literally walked out the front door and then didn't go back. And then luckily the police were driving around and they found me. So yeah, it was like, it did come to a big crisis point, and I feel grateful for it now. Not that it was a laugh, but it was like, sometimes that you have to have something to happen to send you in another direction. And now I look back on it with gratitude, like, thank God, that happened, the police came, and I left, because I don't know where I'd be or if I'd be here now if I hadn't. So yeah, that was
so you left the house.
Yeah.
And then what happened with that? Did you?
Yeah, so then I was actually in the middle of dance college at the time. So I was training as a dancer, which is one of our big disagreement points, because he wanted me to stay at home, make a house, do all of that. And I was still attempting to be a dancer.
Okay.
I hadn't had plans to go abroad or to do any things I ended up doing. I just wanted to finish my training. But I was in the middle of dance college. So like, part of the reason that Living Liberty is called Living Liberty is because it's sort of living freedom, because dance basically kept me going, because I had a space where I could just go in the studio, go to classes, and when I was dancing I felt great and I felt fine, and it's like everything else disappeared and it was fine, and that kept me going enough. So I actually had another full year of dance college. I was working at a bar at the time, and yeah, just it's like those two positives just kept me going. And then eventually I went on my first contract in Morocco, started my blog. And then when I got home, I got a legal team, and I had to go through a whole court process for about 2 years. But yeah, so eventually, he's out of my life. We're not legally tied to each other anymore. I pressed charges. But yeah, so it's a strange one now, because I speak about it quite freely now, and I'm very open about my experiences, and it took me a long time, I think, to really accept what had happened. And it's really common for people who've been through abuse to self-blame and think, well, I did wind him up, and I did do this, and what if I'd done that? And because I think we all do that when we in life, when we've got question marks that don't quite add up. But now I think that's part of the reason I do the work I do now, is because I just think talking about it is vital, and not talking about it is more dangerous than anything else. So yeah.
Really
Can I just say
appreciate
something
that.
first before you go any further? Like, and I'm pretty sure I speak for Matt and Johnny and everyone listening. Like, I've heard stories like this with people going through similar experiences, and I genuinely think you're an absolute hero for being able to go through all of that hardship and then still come out the other end and do what you do now.
Thank you.
I know for a fact there's still a lot of people that are in abusive relationships, or maybe just got out of it but are not willing to speak about it, or still not willing to help themselves. So I think the fact you're doing what you're doing now, like, fair play to you. Fair play to you. I have a real burning desire question. So now you've been through all of this, you've been on this mad journey. What is your like mission with liberty and life, and just moving forward? What is the mission?
So I've asked myself that question many times, because the trouble is with being a creative as well as somebody having a passion project, is you have like 300 ideas a day.
Oh yes,
like,
I know about that.
You know what I mean? When you're like,
I love that.
and I'll be like, I could do this, and what if I made it? And I'm like, I have just tunnel vision. So like at the moment, the funding I got given was to build or to develop workshops in schools, to be able to go into secondary schools and teach about how to build healthy relationships, and to sort of, how to look out for the red flags and this sort of stuff. But with the lockdown and everything else, going to school isn't going to be an option right now. So actually I was looking at developing digital products and sort of online classes. And then I've actually, in the last couple of weeks even, been working out sort of, I really want to get into like the core of what I did and like what helped me to overcome what I went through. And really dance and creativity is that for me, but obviously it'll be different for everybody. But now, yeah, I'm developing, I want to be able to provide tools that people can help themselves with. So it's not just that I want to sort of have a, you know, how to, and to give somebody a framework. It's, I believe that like empowerment and like confidence is the thing that keeps people safe. Even, you know, you can hand somebody, I could write, you know, a big massive textbook of here's the signs, if they say this is what you can do, you know, like almost a how-to guide of relationships. But first of all, everybody has different boundaries, personally, and secondly, if you don't have the confidence in yourself to value yourself, the book's immaterial. Like it's not useful. And I think my goal is I want to focus on empowerment and sort of helping people to value themselves, because ultimately if I had valued myself enough, I wouldn't have put up with the treatment that I did. But I didn't value myself very highly, and partly that was the relationship breaking down my self-esteem. Also, I didn't have very good self-esteem in the first place, so which left me vulnerable. So I think sort of it's a developing concept, but I think the products and that's what my articles are all about. So my sort of ultimate goal is to just provide tools that people can help themselves to empower themselves. And, you know, if you feel like you love yourself, then you're not going to accept somebody not loving you or like, you know, being abusive. So I think that's sort of the key of what I'm trying to share.
Wow.
Yeah, sort of onward development. But yeah, and lots of lying awake at night thinking, or I could do, you know.
Tell me about it.
Sometimes you have to think, okay, I can't change the entire world in one night.
I do it regularly. I stay up till like 1, 2 in the morning. My mind's just like going. I'm just like, hey, Sanjay, you need to go sleep now. And I'm like, no, what about this? But no, I get that. Yeah, man. Crazy.
I didn't have notebooks. I use notebooks a lot. Like I always have done. And like I filled boxes and boxes of notebooks because if I couldn't get it all out onto paper, then I think I'd gone loopy by now. So, yeah.
Well, I think that we've talked about that, like we've said before on previous podcasts and stuff, of actually, you know, if anybody's dealing with any sort of, you know, mental health, especially in this situation, that if they can literally jot it down or they can like just release something, because sometimes, and again, you know, the way that I see that, or even knowing you kind of towards the, you know, when you worked in the bar and stuff, and you know, in your early 20s, is that's when, you know, we met, and that's where, you know, you were kind of just coming out of that, going into the contracts and doing all that stuff, following your dream with the dance stuff, and you were surrounded yourself with like-minded people like myself and friends as well that were kind of pushing you, going, look, follow your dream. You're now, you don't have those ties and everything else. But again, it's just by jotting it down and actually giving it that kind of realism of going, these are all the things. And again, you could always use that as a way of potentially getting out, of going, look, this is all the, almost like a log, but it's, I don't know, it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult. You can't make it as a, like you say, as a one shoe fits all type thing, but it's
it's hard, because also, like I was saying earlier about boundaries, like everybody has slightly different boundaries. So like, you know, I think a lot of like my articles and like the workshops I developed was talking about boundaries, because people will say to me like, okay, but how do I know if something's abusive or not? So somebody, you know, because I don't know, say if you, for example, have an argument and there's some harsh words spoken, or, you know, it's not about going around, I don't want to teach people to run around like holding up red flags being like, found one, like that's really bad, you're really bad. It's more about learning like positive communication, and also just learning to check in with yourself. Like most of the time our instincts tell us what we need to know, and we actually have the answers already, and it's more of a case of listening to it. So like, even though I say, you know, the first 3-4 years with my ex were, you know, really happy, yeah, they were, but there was a hell of a lot of signs that I didn't recognize at the time, or that I ignored. You know, like when he would always want to know who I was friends with that were guys, and I'd be like, oh well, you know, it's just because he really likes me and he's just really keen, and you just kind of like keep covering up. But you know, if you really learn to check in with yourself, which like now I practice meditation and try and just self-reflect, a lot of the time you hold the answers yourself. And when people are getting in touch with me, you know, I get lots of messages and emails from all sorts of people saying, you know, my partner's doing this, this, and this, and this. I don't really feel comfortable with it. It's making me really unhappy. Is that an okay thing or not? And I always just think, well, you know, I say to them, if you're asking these questions, that means something's happening and you don't feel right about it. It doesn't have to be that your friend would think that was fine, that makes it fine. If you don't feel comfortable with it, that's okay. Like, you don't have to,
Yeah.
you know, they're searching for the validation of whether, you know, they're overreacting or not. And I think it's just about, you know, being able to open conversations. If you can't talk to your partner about it, about whatever the issue is, it's just, you know, reaching out to somebody else you can trust, or somebody like, you know, through Living Liberty or whatever, to just talk about it. Because when things are small, like, sometimes things can be dealt with. And like, all of us are, I was saying to you the other day, Matt, when we were talking, is I sort of had this realization and watched this TED talk with this amazing relationship educator in America. He was saying we're all guilty of abuse, and it's a really uncomfortable thing to think about. But like, everybody, like all four of us, everybody on the planet has at some point been abusive, whether they meant to or not. Like, we've all like slammed a door to prove a point, or I don't know, been like jealous or checked someone's phone, or, you know, all the things we're not proud of. But it's just being able to like check in with yourself, realize the behavior's there. And, you know, because it's an onward process. Like, I'm in a really happy relationship now, but, you know, every now and then, I don't know, it's like you have to still be aware of like your own relationship behaviors and take responsibility for your own like emotions and moods. And like, it's complicated. And like, when emotions are involved, usually your head and your heart aren't always as connected as you might like them to be. So it's just, I think like the more we talk about it, like conversations like this are really important. And, you know, it's, yeah, all that stuff. Because Instagram will make everyone look like their relationships are perfect, and it sort of feeds the thing of what's the perfect image of life. And it's just, yeah, I think the more we talk, the better. Yeah, generally.
What if the roles were reversed? Because I was watching something the other day, I can't remember what it was, but they were saying the stats of like people in emotionally abusive relationships is like 90% women that are getting abused, and then 10% men. But the 10% men, there was like half or 0.2% that actually spoke up about it.
Well, I think part of it is I find statistics really hard to really get a grip on, because really, like, in terms of domestic violence stats, most of what's recorded is only if the police get involved, because like, how else are you going to measure it? Like, as in, there hasn't been a national survey of how everyone's relationships are or have been. So like, I'd say, and you know, women typically may reach out for help more often, or talk about it, or be more willing to speak about the fact they've been through it. Not always, like, but it's like whether those conversations are happening. Because of course, like, men are in abusive relationships too, and like, and also obviously there's like gay relationships where there's abuse happening, any kind of relationship, and also even in friendships too, like it happens between friends. So yeah, it's a really difficult thing with you know, what's who's the most affected. And like, generally, yeah, like, women are typically statistically more affected. And you know, sometimes the way women are in culture, you know, we're taught to be nurturers, and there's like the maternal instinct and all of that, which can mean that women keep going back trying to fix it. Whereas I hate sort of using stereotypes of men do this and women do that, but typically culture teaches women to keep trying to overcome it and all of this. And yeah, I just think it's like, I think my work generally, the most people that engage with it generally are young women. That's generally read my blog over the years, but the voice of what I share is that we can all learn to build healthier relationships. Like, there's nobody that's exempt that is like, oh, you know, I've been in a happy relationship for 20 years, I'm fine. Or, you know, it's just realizing that we all affect each other with how we communicate, and and just sort of taking responsibility for it, really.
I always find the people that talk about their relationships all the time are not happy.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what? It's a common myth. The people that post on social media all the time, been here, been there, checking in, they're the people that are unhappy.
Yeah, like I'm sure we've all seen a couple of like lockdown instant relationships that popped up. Like I saw a bunch of them where it was lockdown, two people have suddenly just got together and have been in quarantine together, and they were like posting every 2 minutes about how wonderful everything was. And then unfortunately, inevitably, by the end of lockdown, it's ended. And it's like, generally, you know, I'm all for romance. I'm a big romantic. And I think it's like, I don't know, but there's one thing being sort of romantic and one thing being like swept off your feet to the point of you're knocked off balance. Like, if you think about the thing of being swept off your feet, it's not very comfortable. Like, I think relationships, it's like sort of this like lovely Disney moment. And actually, you know, like in the relationship I was in, when I met him, and I was, 15, like we'd moved in together within a few months, and I was only like a teenager, and he was saying he loved me within 2 to 3 weeks, and I'm, some people do fall in love really quickly and whatever, but if it's moving that fast and everything's so quick and you've got engaged within such a short period of time, like there's no need to rush. And if it is being rushed and that person's sweeping you off your feet, as I was saying, sometimes it just needs a little bit of a check-in of like, why is it going this quickly, and why is it so overwhelming, and why haven't I seen my friends for the past month, and like, why are they saying they know me better than anyone, better than my family? That's a bit strange. Like, it's like, again, it's going back to our instincts, like that instinct's in there saying this is a bit strange, but what our heads want is like the regular romantic thing. And you don't want to, when you meet someone amazing and you're attracted to them, you don't want to believe that there's something going wrong, or like you want to believe that it's all going to be great.
Yeah.
So, but,
how old was he when how old was he when you first got together? So you said you were 15.
So he was like, I thought he was 3 years older than me, and we've been together about 2 years, and I found out he was older than he said, possibly somewhat of a red flag. Because he was from another country, and he had come to England, and like basically the paperwork he'd got to be able to stay, he said that he was younger, so he's like stuck with his other age. So it was just another line I put down to like, and
sounds a nice bloke.
Yeah, so he was actually 5 years older than me. So when I think about being 15, now when you're 15, you think you're an adult. I now, I used to teach 15-year-olds, teaching them ballet. And I'm like, 15 and 20, like if you had a 20-year-old mate and they were dating a 15-year-old, you'd probably be asking some questions. Like, it's,
considering that's underage.
and even just the age gap, even 21 and 16, you sort of, I don't know. But then, a 15-year-old girl's very impressionable, and they're very easily,
And finally, from what you were saying there, Helen, was, you were saying that, it's almost like you only realised he was being abusive when he was actually being physically abusive, potentially. And actually, even from, it progressed so quickly. He was being controlling and being he was taking control of the situation right from the very, very start. And, like you say, telling a 15-year-old girl, of a guy who was older and seemed like he had everything going for him, or he was good looking or whatever. And it's kind of like, and you look at the other guys that are potentially in your school, and they're like all weedy little guys that they don't have a job, they don't have money, they don't have anything else they can give you. So he's giving you this stuff and you're like, wow, and he's telling me he loves me? Like, this is incredible. So he was controlling straight from the very start. And
he was filling in all my he was essentially giving me what I thought was my own values, and that I felt valuable when I was with him. And at my school, I was more of like a coaster at school in terms of like social groups. I wasn't like popular, I wasn't particularly unpopular. I just sort of like, I don't know, floated between. And then suddenly, people are like, oh, you're going out with that guy, and like, I don't know, like he was really handsome. We'd go to like, I don't know, parties with my friends and stuff, and they'd be like, oh, he's so amazing, he's so great. And obviously then when we bought the house, and and he's very charming. Like, people think of domestic violence and they think of like a thug, but this guy is, he's just a charming guy. And that's the thing, is charmers then have quite a lot of control, because they can make an impression very quickly. They're the people that are very engaging. It's, there's a certain character actually to a sort of narcissistic abuser. And obviously there's lots of lovely, charming people, and that's what's so difficult about it. It's like, I and that's what I'm so careful about when I'm saying things, is just, I don't want anyone to go out and be like scanning around themselves to see who's got this sign, this sign, this sign.
Yeah.
Like your instincts will tell you quite often, like if, I don't know, even in the years after that relationship, like, or even before I met my most, like my boyfriend now, sometimes I'd go on dates and I'd be, I'd just get this instinct, and I'd realise, that they were saying everything I wanted to hear. No matter what I said, they agreed with it and loved everything I did. It was almost like too much, and like my instinct told me that it wasn't genuine, and I'd usually be right. And then, because some people you really will have a lot in common with, and you'll feel really comfortable with them really soon, and it's a genuine connection, but you'll know that, like, your instincts are there to protect you. So it's more, that's what I sort of try and encourage, it's like listening to yourself.
Yeah. There's two words which keep coming up for me is master manipulator. when it comes to narcissists and narcissistic people.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's ingrained in them. They don't know they are, but they are doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a real tough challenge in a backwards way, but yeah.
And it's difficult to sort of, you know, and it's hard when, you know, you probably when you've known someone for a long time as well. And like, you know, I'd realised in recent years, like the last couple of years, I'd realised that actually some of the friends that I had in my life were quite narcissistic, and like they were quite toxic friendships that I was still engaging in. And it wasn't a case of, you know, I suddenly had a clear out and, you know, disconnect from loads of people, but it was like I came to a point in my continuing development, like I'm not, you know, we're all healing and developing over time, like I'm still working things out. And I'd realised that actually, I think it was actually my 30th birthday. I had a really lovely 30th birthday party, but there was a few people that were in attendance of this party, and just their behaviour and how they made me feel at that event just made me really unhappy. And that it's like I had to sort of check in with myself and realise that actually I've done all this work talking about healthy relationships and talking about, you know, in terms of partner to partner relationships, and then actually I was still people pleasing. I was still sort of following the same habits, because it is a habit. I was still following the same habits in nurturing these friendships that, you know, if I didn't say something that sort of agreed with them, I'd sort of either get stonewalled, where they just don't speak to you for a while, or they'd be like comments back, or, you know, just unhealthy approaches. And I just realised that I just didn't need it in my life, and all I did was sort of very gently create some distance, and it was a really healthy forward step. And it's like, you know, I had to do some self-development, and I would look myself in the mirror and be like, how was I still doing that? Like, you know, I was speaking publicly about healthy relationships, and yet I still had some in my life. So it's just having that more of an awareness, and I think that over time you get to know yourself better. Generally you're more aware of who you are in your like 30s than maybe you were when you were 21. I don't know. So it's just, we're all working things out over time, and it's just like the more aware you can be of who you've got around you, because it has a big effect. Who you have around you immediately affects your emotions, like day to day.
100%. And again, we said on, I feel like we're saying it on every single podcast, but surround yourself with like-minded people and people that are, you know, positive and actually, you know, and advocates for you and what you're doing and everything else. That, you know, they're your biggest fans, you know, and that's the type of people that you want around you. And you know, and I think that the main thing of like a coping thing for you was actually by giving yourself that time to realize all of these things, and actually sitting back and being almost like a third person to your own life, and actually going, look, you know, actually, like, of seeing all these things and seeing these things aren't actually positive for you. So and I think, like I say, people that are listening, I think that's a thing to take away from this podcast, is to at least give yourself that time. And you know, if you feel that, you know, unfortunately, if you're listening to this and you are in a abusive relationship, or you're kind of seeing these flags that Helen's saying, then reach out to Helen of Living Liberty, and we'll put all your posts and everything, all your stuff onto here as well. But Helen, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a great conversation, yes, again. So thanks very much, and thanks very much, guys, for your input as well. It's been amazing. So, Helen, thank you. And we'll see you next week, guys. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. And thank you to Helen for being so open about her journey. Each and every week, we'll be having more incredible guests onto our show. So please stay tuned. Again, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. And we'll see you next week. Take care.